Good evening and welcome. Appreciate everyone being here tonight for our monthly C4 meeting. Let me dual devising it tonight. So on behalf of Chair Bernard and I just want to welcome you and thank you all. For those of you that were battle tested this last couple of weeks and months with campaigning, and thank you for weathering the storm and showing up and being here. Transition is always hard, and we are change leaders for sure, whether we are a counselor or a mayor or a director of a department. We have to be able to manage the change. So here we go again. More changes afoot. So Chair Bernard, did you want to say anything before we move into housekeeping items?
No, I guess I do. It's good to see you all. Tom, your hair looks long and you look skinny. And Christine, I hope everything's going great with the baby. Very cute. It's good to see you. And other than that, let's go ahead and get going. I'm tired and I've got election results to watch.
All right, so the housekeeping front, we're looking for approval of the minutes for the September 3rd, 2020 meeting. Any comments before or a motion?
I'll move for minutes.
I move we accept.
All right, I'll give it to Mr. Axelrod. Any comments, changes, or whatnot? No? Can I get a second?
Second.
I second.
Thank you, Mr. Markgraf. Appreciate it. All right, all those in favor, throw your hands up on the screen there. Great. Anyone opposed? All right, motion carries. The minutes have been approved. Second item under housekeeping is the notice of the STIP discretionary fund letter that I think approved via electronically, but I think Chris, we've got to do an official approval of that this evening with this group, correct?
No, this is just more of an FYI about how the process worked, just so everyone's aware. So this issue came in after the C4 September meeting, but it was a time-sensitive one. So C4 previously had vocally supported transit access in that area of 205. But because of the time issues, we didn't have the ability to bring it to a normal C4 meeting to follow our normal process. So we brought it to the C4 Executive Committee to make sure that it went through some kind of formal channel and review, and it was discussed and agreed to take it to a vote by email of C4, which was done. And so that it was approved through that email process. And this is just notifying you that it was approved and sent off and finalized.
Okay, that makes the lift that much easier. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Anyone want to comment on that letter? You can kind of post fact? No? Okay. Moving into an update on the 2024-27 State Transportation Improvement Plan. And I think we have Travis, is it Brower? Good, I got it right. With ODOT here to take us through that. It's all yours, Travis.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me here tonight. You have saved me from sitting in front of a computer screen, clicking refresh every 3 minutes. But if I look distracted, it probably means I got distracted and decided to hit refresh again. So I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint that we will share with you tonight. I call this presentation How to Spend $2.2 billion. So we are beginning the development of the 24-27 statewide transportation improvement program, which is the capital construction program for the most part that Oregon develops every few years for the transportation system. And as I noted, we have $2.2 billion that the Oregon Transportation Committee will be allocating between all the different needs across the state, across different parts of the system, across different modes of transportation. So as you can imagine, $2.2 billion sounds like a lot of money up front. And then when you get into the needs across the state, it quickly dwindles and you realize how little it really is. We started this process back in July with the Transportation Commission and are now several months in. We are doing our best to have pretty robust public comment opportunities, even in the face of not being able to do anything live, but we've been able to develop a number of virtual opportunities for people to provide comment. We just had a webinar this last week with a public comment opportunity. And right now we still have an online open house that allows people to provide input on the funding allocation. That's on our website, odotopenhouse.org through November 16th. So you still have about a week and a half left on that. Encourage you to go on there and provide feedback, either as a private citizen or on behalf of your community, or even as a group there. The same with public comment to OTC, obviously. The commission values the input we get from our stakeholders. And so we encourage you to go on their website if you want to submit a comment, again, on behalf of yourself or your community, or even on behalf of the entire C4. We'd be very grateful for any comments you want to provide. We do recommend getting those in by about November 20th for the commission's December 1st meeting. So we have time to get that to them in advance and they can review it. But we'll take them all the way up through the last day of November. The commission just won't have as much chance to really review them. So we're getting out to a lot of different groups as well, taking comments and feedback. And so I look forward to getting any feedback from you tonight at the end of this discussion. Every STIP cycle, the commission determines what the basic categories of funding are going to be in the STIP. These are the categories to which we dedicate the state and federal highway funds that we have available to us. And there's 6 categories for it. The Enhanced Highway Program is for highway projects, generally on the state highway system, that expand or enhance the transportation system, things like new lanes or interchanges. Fix-it projects are ones that preserve, maintain, or fix the state highway system. We also have a safety category that is for projects that focused on reducing fatal and serious injury crashes on Oregon roads. And that's for all users, whether they're driving, biking, walking, etc. We really try to use data and we share that money with local governments to try to get the best bang for the buck. So figure out where we can most effectively use dollars to reduce crashes on the system. We also have a non-highway category that funds bicycle, pedestrian, public transportation projects across the state, and a local programs category that provides funding for local governments to pick their own priority projects across the system. And then there's sort of a catch-all other functions. A lot of it's sort of our planning and research and data collection type work, but there's a variety of things that are in that general category. So what we're doing with the commission right now is developing funding scenarios and working through and analyzing those. Each of the funding scenarios that we put on the table for the commission is similar in some ways and differs in some ways. What we want to have the commission be able to do is understand what the trade-offs are from those different ways of allocating the funding. So you'll see here that we got that solid line near the bottom. That's because all of the scenarios basically have the same amount of funding for the local government programs, for ADA curb ramps that we need to do to meet our federal requirements and a settlement agreement we have in place, and for those other functions. And then the scenarios differ on how much money they put into fix it or enhance or safety or the non-highway categories. And really what we're talking about is shifting that last about $600 million of funding. It differs across all of these different scenarios. So some of them put more money into the different categories. And the idea there was to do an analysis to see how they affect different outcomes on the transportation system, the goals that we're trying to achieve as a state for the transportation system. So when we talk about those goals and outcomes, we start with the OTC and ODOT strategic action plan that the commission approved last month. In that, our commission laid out 3 priority areas. One is equity, ensuring that the benefits and burdens of the transportation system are shared with all Oregonians across the state. regardless of geography or race or any other characteristic. We also talk about a modern transportation system, building, maintaining, and operating a truly modern multimodal transportation system that serves the whole state. And then to back that all up, our last priority area is sufficient reliable funding, because we know we need to have adequate funding if we're going to achieve these other goals or other priorities. As you can imagine, within that, the modern transportation system arena really lays out the goals for the transportation system and how we are going to operate that system and build and maintain it. So the first goal, preservation stewardship, about how we preserve the system and our environment. Safety, again, about reducing the fatalities and serious injuries that harm so many Oregonians each year. Accessibility, mobility, and climate change, another key goal about broadening access to the transportation system through multimodal options and addressing climate change. Congestion relief, clearly a growing problem, particularly in the Portland metro region, and noting that we need to invest in that comprehensive congestion management strategy. So those are the general goals that inform what we're trying to achieve, and that will inform how the commission looks at allocation of funding in the 2024 to 2027 STIP. Based on those, the commission tasked us with developing a trade-off evaluation framework. We know we don't have enough money in any category or enough really to achieve any one of our goals. But we want to see how can we best balance those across all of the goals. What's the optimal mix of investments that we can make to ensure that we're meeting multiple goals and not just one or a couple. So those goals relate to climate mitigation, actually addressing the emissions of greenhouse gases, as well as climate adaptation and resilience, making sure that the transportation system adapts to a changing environment and extreme weather events. Congestion is clearly another goal that we want to achieve, reduce congestion. Social equity, multimodal mobility, those are really tied together in terms of supporting all user needs, and particularly for disadvantaged populations, through better multimodal access. And then safety, obviously, is a key goal for the state, and the state of good repair. So these are the outcome areas against which we judged each of the scenarios, the potential ways of allocating all of this funding. Our climate office then took these various scenarios and ran them through a filter that gave us a sense of how each performed against all of these outcome areas. So we started with what we call our adjusted baseline scenario. This is basically how we would allocate funding if we basically just took the 21-24 STIP and marched forward without changing a whole heck of a lot. So as you can see, this is largely goes to fix it, but there's money for enhanced safety and non-highway funds as well. And we gave each of these goals and outcome areas a letter grade for this scenario to see how well do we do in meeting those identified needs. We then went forward and compared each of the scenarios against that baseline to see how well it does. So the enhanced scenario is one that puts more of the money into enhance and safety and non-highway needs, but it comes at the expense of putting money into pavement and bridges. So as you can see, in this scenario, we have more congestion relief, better social equity and multimodal mobility, and a little bit better safety outcomes as well. But then we see that the bridge conditions deteriorate because we're putting less money into the fix-it programs that keep the system in a state of good repair. The non-highway scenario that we put together for the commission, this puts even more money into the non-highway category with some money for safety and enhanced highway, and then again, a reduced amount of money for the fix-it programs. So as you can imagine, this one, you see the climate mitigation is very strong, along with social equity and multimodal mobility, as we're putting a lot of money into bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, public transportation. But then again, it comes at the expense of the system deteriorating a little bit as our pavement and bridge conditions head downhill because we have less money for the fix-it categories. The safety and non-highway scenario, This is one that, again, has relatively less money for bridges and pavement and other fix-it programs, but quite a bit going into the safety and non-highway modes. And again, this is a lot like that non-highway scenario. In fact, after we made a couple tweaks to it at the commission's request, they're almost indistinguishable. So really strong in many of the areas of climate and social equity and multi-mobility and safety as well. But again, we'd see conditions on the system deteriorate a bit. The last scenario is one that really pulls heavy on the fix-it lever, puts a lot of money into fix-it, but at the expense of the non-highway funding in particular. So in this one, we see that a lot of our indicators trend downward around social equity and multi-mobility and around climate mitigation, but the system actually looks better. We have a better outcomes for bridges and pavement because of that higher investment in fix-it programs. We also looked in the end at how these scenarios compared across a couple different indicators. One was just basic system condition. How is the pavement condition on our priority routes across the state? So you can see that under that fix-it scenario, it's far to the right. That scenario 4 is one that you actually see conditions look pretty good. But in scenarios 1, 2, and 3, they decline from the baseline level so that a lot more of our pavement would be in bad shape. On the other hand, you see some different outcomes. When you look at the completion of the bike ped system on state highways, you get much better outcomes in terms of how long it will take us to complete that system under scenarios 1, 2, and 3. And then it takes a lot longer under that fix-it scenario because there's so little multimodal funding available. We took a look at how each of these scenarios fared in comparison to one another. Or in comparison to the baseline, really. So the bright green are the ones that fare the best in each of these categories. The lighter green is one that does a little bit better than the baseline. And then the gray is basically neutral, and the red is the one that look a little bit worse in that regard. So as you can see, we categorized each of these and laid out a comparison across the different scenarios to help the Transportation Commission understand how each of these scenarios would impact these key outcomes. So that's the basic substance. The next steps that we're doing this month, we are out talking to you. You're my second presentation of the day, taking public comment on the scenarios through that webinar, the online open house, all those efforts to explain the scenarios and then get comment from our constituents. In December, the commission will select a funding allocation at the high level. You know, how much goes to fix it versus enhanced highway versus non-highway funding. And then in January, we'll come back and we'll actually dig down into the program level allocations. So how much goes to trails versus transit within that non-highway category? Or what are the priorities for investing in enhanced highway projects? Should we be focused on congestion in the Portland metro area or freight benefits across the state? Or some other approach within that non-highway or that enhanced highway category. We'll also get direction from the commission on how to plan for any additional federal funds, whether that's either a slight bump or maybe we can always hope that there's a major infrastructure investment at the federal level. So we will be having those discussions in January, and then at that point, we're really off to the races of actually beginning the hard work of going out and selecting projects, working with communities to develop those projects and then get them onto the ground in the next few years. It is a very long process. We start about 3 years before the STIP is finally approved by the federal government. Because of that time we need to take to select or determine how to allocate funding and then go through that project selection process. As you all are aware, transportation projects don't come together in a day or two. It takes multiple years to get them through a public process and the design and finally into project delivery so they can be built. So with that, I will wrap up. I am happy to take any questions, take any comments, and provide any feedback that you might have.
Okay, just blowing up my screen here so I can see everybody.
Can you shift back to the other mode so we can?
Yeah, I'll stop sharing here.
There we go. Travis, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Any comments, questions on the presentation?
This is John Keith with the Stafford Hamlet. I'm curious how your strategy for 24 through 27 coincides with the tolling effort going on. It just seems to be a big disconnect. I just want to know, how does it come together?
Yeah, so we are working through development of tolling, which is in some ways, it's certainly tied into the STIP, but it's also on sort of a parallel track. As you know, we've talked about tolling on I-205 and I-5 and are working on the basic scope of all of that work. The challenge we have is that we have some funding from HB 2017 that was provided for the Rose Quarter, but none obviously for I-205. So right now, I-205 is essentially left without any significant funding beyond the work up front. And that's what's really forced us to look at tolling as the funding source. In this STIP, we do not anticipate having a significant amount of money, just direct state or federal cash, to undertake major projects, either in the Portland metro region or in other parts of the state, absent some other funding coming online, whether that would be additional state funds or additional federal funds or use of tolling. All of those scenarios that I showed you have a relatively limited amount of money for enhanced highway projects. So we are at a point where, for the most part, the enhanced highway projects have been selected by the legislature in recent years, and we have had relatively limited resources in the STIP in order to do additional work and pay for additional projects. Hence some of the reason why we are looking at tolling as a financing source and as a way to manage demand on the transportation system.
Thank you.
You see the hands?
Yeah. Travis, good to see you again. Paul Savas here. Question, our Clackamas County Coordinating Committee here is made up of urban and rural folks. And so the STIP dollars are really, or the STIP grant process that the R1 Act typically goes through for the applications from our cities and unincorporated Clackamas County as well, is really the only source of dollars for the rural area. So it's incredibly important that that bucket not be reduced. And also our needs are, we're kind of a microcosm of the state. So we have urban needs, we have safety needs, we have almost everything on your menu, if you will. So is the baseline model that you first displayed probably most representative of, number one, what we have had and what will do us the best, or is there anything that can enhance that grant process bucket?
Yeah, Commissioner Savas, the 21-24 STIP that we just finished developing, just went into effect this last summer, is pretty similar to that baseline, adjusted baseline. There's some things, some additional money phases in HB 2017, projects phase out, particularly those earmark projects that were in HB 2017. But that is the one that is the most similar to what we saw in the last round of the STIP. So within that last STIP, there were a number of project or programs that were available to local governments, some in the local programs category, and others that are in the non-highway category. Some of those flow through Metro, some of them flow through ODOT, but we do try to make funding available to local governments for priority projects, whether that's, bridge projects on the local system, some of the non-highway modes, bicycle and pedestrian trails or sidewalk type projects. And then, of course, in the past, we've had various types of enhanced projects. There was a period where we made it a multimodal, jurisdictionally blind program several STIP cycles ago. We haven't done that for a while. Instead, we've been putting more money into the non-highway type enhanced projects that oftentimes allow local governments to apply for those. So we don't know exactly what that program structure will be going forward in this STIP. That's actually the discussion we're going to start in December with the commission and then finish in January about how within each of those categories do we actually fund individual level programs.
Well, thank you. I just want to just end with this, and it's something that I think we all need to be cognizant of, and not a lot of us have been around a long time, but those who have remember Connect Oregon. And Connect Oregon offered a package of bike, ped, trail, and also freight, right? There was that heavy on freight and both port and rail and all those other things. So with that and with STIP combined, we had kind of a balance there. Now with Connect Oregon gone, we have a little bit of a vacuum there. So we now have less dollars, and the Region 1 Act was very instrumental in both those funding packages.
Yep. Thank you, Commissioner Savas, for reminding me about Connect Oregon. It's technically outside the STIP, but it is a really important program. And it's one that there was the good news that came out of HB 2017 about Connect was that the legislature provided a permanent funding source. The bad news that came out was that they didn't provide much permanent funding, and they provided a number of earmarks that will use the funding up for a number of years. I was just looking at cash flow on the Connect Oregon program last week, and it looks as though next biennium, maybe even as early as next year, we can start a grant program for the Connect Oregon program. So it's still going to be a while, and it will have been many, many years since we've run a Connect Oregon program, but we are going to be able to get back into that game fairly soon, hopefully.
Thank you.
Councillor Heisey.
Trying to write and think at the same time. At least I'm not chewing gum. Thank you, Travis. That was really interesting and helpful to hear. I love that you've got some concrete ways that the climate goals that this are really being incorporated into this. My question is sort of, it's kind of a Milwaukee specific one. We have in the past, like with the Monroe Greenway project, we've been able to figure out how to leverage different buckets of money from STIP program. And I'm wondering, under these different configurations, how we might be able to, if you have any advice or thoughts, how we might be able to unstick a project we've got going that just hasn't fit right, and we don't know how to make it fit better. And that would be the Kellogg Dam, where we've got this culvert replacement project that's a very high priority for everyone in the state. And then we've got this perfectly functional bridge that's a part of the culvert that is not a priority to replace.
Yeah, it's a really good question. When we actually just had our STIP team was meeting today and talking about how we can try to make our programs a bit less siloed, because as you probably know, we've got a culvert program, we've got a bridge program, we've got a pavement program, we've got 8 bike ped programs, and they don't always align very well when you're trying to do projects like that. So I don't have any specific advice for that specific project, though it's one I've heard about many times over the years. I will say that in general, we're trying to find ways to look, particularly in the multimodal space of, bicycle and pedestrian projects that oftentimes have to go to 5 different small programs. They may go into the MTIP to get money from a regional trails project, and they come to us for another type of funding. We're trying to see if we can change it so that instead of projects having to chase money, funding sources, we can find ways to make the money fit onto the priority projects. and really look at priority, multimodal corridors and investments, so that we're not making people, jump through a lot of hoops and through a lot of rigmarole. So we are working that. As you can imagine, though, it's tremendously complicated because each of these funding sources comes with specific strings attached to it, whether we built those strings or whether the federal government or the legislature put those strings on the funding type. So yeah, I recognize that that's a real problem, and that makes it far too complicated for ODOT and local governments to use these funds effectively for some of those complex, and particularly for multimodal.
And this is in many ways a multimodal project as well, because it connects up to different major bike ped corridors in a bunch of ways. So great.
Yep. Now you put your finger on a problem. We haven't figured out how to solve it, but we recognize.
At least you recognize it. That's all I needed. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Mayor Axelrod.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Travis. This might be a dumb question, but do orphan highway programs fall into the STIP? So they do. That's what I thought. So, we have a vital north-south corridor here in the metro area connecting Canby, Oregon City, West Lynn, Lake Oswego into Portland. That's hugely dysfunctional, unsafe. We're trying to make it multimodal, and it's in terrible condition. And now that metro measure has gone down, we're back to ground zero. That's called Highway 43. And, I just want to know what the heck we have to do to get Highway 43 and, into good functional shape and multimodal like we all want. And I'm just wondering, do we submit comments at this time, or, any thoughts you have about that?
Yeah, Mayor Axelrod, it's a really good question. And it again, we that STIP team meeting I was at today, we wrestled with the same question on those orphan highways, those urban arterials that are under state jurisdiction, because much like multimodal projects, it can be really tough. I mean, when we do pavement projects, we're focused on, where are the worst pavement conditions or the areas we need to pave, and it doesn't necessarily marry up with the bicycle and pedestrian program funding that we need to make those roads more accessible for multiple users, and safety programs. So oftentimes what we have to do is find creative ways to bring a whole variety of funding sources to bear on a single stretch of road. But that can be really challenging. So we are trying to find some ways. We talked about, whether we look at different program criteria to make that easier. We have not been successful yet in actually setting up a jurisdictional transfer. We proposed that to the legislature in the past and haven't really gotten any traction. We've proposed that to the commission in the past and haven't really gotten any traction. So I think we have to look at how we can work within the existing structures to be able to direct money. Maybe we're not able to fix up all of 43, because you're right, there's a lot of problems on a lot of miles of road there. But maybe we can at least take some priority sections and try to make them more functional for more users and really serve the community better. So just like the last set of questions, it's on our radar screen. We don't know quite how to solve that within the limited funding we have, but we're certainly going to try to work that.
Thank you.
Mayor Knapp.
Thank you. I'd like to go up to a little bit of a, on the higher level, I guess. We're talking about 2.2 billion, I think you said, for the state. And then it was referenced if we were able to get some kind of a movement on a federal infrastructure program. To what extent do the agreements on how to divvy up the 2.2 carry over to any larger funding method that might become available in a different program? And I ask that because, if we got really limited funds, we say, well, we're going to have to do a little bit of this and we've got to do a little bit of that. But if we got a major allocation of money, we might choose to do something other than allocate it to the same small percentages that we're talking about within the STIP. So how does that, how would that work? Or to be optimistic, how will that work?
Well, I'm glad you're optimistic. I had a pessimistic exchange with a lobbyist today. Given the situation in Washington, D.C., I'm not sure I'm going to wait for manna from Washington, D.C. to start falling on our heads. So what we have done in the past, we view the allocation in the STIP that the commission is doing right now as sort of the base, the gotta haves, the key priorities. And then in the past, there have been a couple of times when a additional investment has come from either Washington, D.C. or the state legislature. Now, it's always important to note that usually that comes with some strings attached, that they say, we're going to give you more money, but a chunk of it has to go into, X, Y, or Z. So when it does come, though, we have always gone to the commission and had a conversation about, what are the priorities we haven't been able to get to that a significant infusion of resources would allow us to do. And so it's a little bit of a different conversation, particularly if you've taken care of some of your base needs for preservation and safety and some of those things. It allows you to think a little bit more creatively, a little bit more outside the box about that. Now, at the same time, I will tell you, we have not actually had a major infusion of federal resources in 15 years. We have seen our federal funding basically flat for a decade now. In fact, I was just running numbers with our federal numbers guy. We're down 20 million this year compared to last year. And so as a result, we are in a situation where we are really looking at, focusing on fundamentals and priorities, some of the basic stuff for now, and then, knocking on wood, that Congress will come through with some massive infusion.
Thank you.
Councilor Morrison.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Travis, great presentation. Has there been any thought to extending the public comment? And the reason I ask is what Major Axelrod brought up. A city like Tualatin would be extremely supportive of improvements in Highway 43, but we haven't had a chance to weigh in because we weighed in on the T2020 plan, which we felt was going to and thought would cover that. And obviously, for the time being, in the foreseeable future, it's not going to. And it is literally, it's technically impossible for us to send out a letter of support within this time frame because we don't have an open meeting scheduled that would allow us to do that. And I would gather, based on Westland City Council meetings and everybody else, Canby and Lake Oswego, that they're all in the same problem where it's very difficult to provide public comment. I'm aware, our staff has told me, I haven't read their comments, my staff informed me that both R1 Act and JPAC sent letters requesting an extension specifically for that reason. So I would ask you to consider that to allow us to, and allow C4 to allow to make a public comment as well.
Yeah, we have extended the process just a little bit into January, but we do have some limitations in terms of when we need to start going to work on selecting projects that make it difficult to extend much beyond that. The thing I would tell you is if you're focused on a specific project or segment or anything like that, we can work some of those issues in the project selection process. And even after January, we go through a little bit of program development where we take the basic outlines of what the commission has given us and then start developing criteria and processes for selecting projects. So the December and January are really very high level decisions by the commission between, do we fund pavement and bridges or do we fund bikes and transit? So there's still a lot of opportunities to weigh in on some of those specific. And I would, encourage you to do that if there are particularly, on say the Oregon 43, if there's regional support for that and for the general concept of these urban arterials. It's something we've heard a lot. The 2 times I've been at the R1 Act so far since the summer, that's been a major topic of conversation, and JPAC has certainly been pushing that as well. So it's something that's definitely on the radar screen, and any thinking about how we can try to address that would be helpful.
Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you. My mayor actually addressed much of my concern or what I wanted to raise, but thank you from the Metro perspective for that extension to make sure that we have time. We do have a set of corridors that have a good potential for jurisdictional transfer for orphan highway improvements. And I guess, what is your perspective on the opportunity for blended projects with enhance and safety going forward, no matter what their funding levels?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we're looking at to try to figure out how we can bring those multiple different types of funding streams together. That said, we haven't figured out, because we haven't talked to the commission yet, what are the priorities for the enhanced funding. It could be that some of that money goes to those orphan highways and jurisdictional transfers for the urban arterials. They may choose other directions to go there. So we're still flying a little bit blind as to where the commission is going to go on the specifics of the investments within some of those categories. But we are going to be looking for those opportunities to leverage multiple funding sources from, say, safety and non-highway, and potentially enhance for some of those corridors, knowing that there just isn't going to be a lot to go around. I mean, I don't know what the cost of a 43 or an 82nd Avenue would look like, but we're likely talking in the couple $100 million potentially for some, depending on the length, and that given the funding available statewide, we're probably not going to make a lot of progress. It's unfortunate in that sense that the Metro bond measure would have put a huge amount of money into some of those corridors. That clearly is not going to be available now.
I will say 43 will be a bargain relative to all the others.
There's some pretty gnarly sections of 43, though. If you want to be able to get bicyclists and pedestrians safe on that road.
Commissioner Sabas, did you have something else?
Yeah, you just touched on exactly one. I think one of the key issues, Travis, is that there's not going to be enough money to go around for all the orphan highways that the region wants to see happen. And so there's, we're going to spread that peanut butter so thin that we're just not going to really do anything. And I know that there was some discussion or chatter about possibly looking at a separate funding source for that. And I don't know what that was. I don't know if that was legislative. Do you know anything about that?
Commissioner Savas, there have been some conversations about that in the past. We had some conversations early, really in sort of the pre-development of HB 2017 about a orphan highway pool of funding. And I know that's been something that's been talked about within the metro region as well to get legislative support. It's never really gone very far. Like have never been able to get any real legs underneath it. For whatever reason, I think the way we talk about it, when we talk about jurisdictional transfers and orphan highways, it hasn't generally caught the legislative imagination. And I don't know why that is, but perhaps we need to find a way to talk about them a little bit differently in terms of, being able to provide safe and livable routes for local communities and addressing those, high volume, high speed facilities in a different way than they are today. So again, I just don't know that we've ever been able to get much success there when we've had those conversations with the legislature.
Thank you.
Mayor Axelrod, you're our last person to make comment for right now.
Yeah, I like the idea of looking at the multi-jurisdictional option. In some ways, if we could get away, one of the things we found in the design work for 43 is trying to meet ODOT standards was very expensive. I mean, our project was driven up like 3 times the cost. It doesn't necessarily have to meet those standards per se, but if we could, find a way to get around that and work together multi-jurisdictionally and make those improvements, I think we could save money and accomplish our goals.
Yeah, there's certainly different ways of doing those jurisdictional transfers. I mean, some of them we can transfer to the local jurisdiction with a check attached so that you can do the work, so that you don't have to follow the ODOT design level. So others, we do the work and then turn it over. And yeah, there are different approaches and different costs for a lot of that.
Commissioner Morrison and Mr. Keith, you guys still have your hands up. Do you guys have additional comments? No. Okay.
No, this is John Keith. No, I don't have any more questions.
Okay. Something I think for this group, and I think an interesting point was brought up in this conversation is the piece between small incremental improvements across many projects, or looking at making bigger improvements or investments in a few to see greater movement. I think we seem to have this conversation every time STIP and STIF season comes about for us. And I think that that might be something that we as a group, depending on how these categories start to shake out, we'll need to have a serious look at how do we want to approach it. Small little changes across the board or big incremental ones. So maybe that's something for the next meeting. So great. So we're going to go, if there's nothing else on this, Travis, thank you. Great presentation. Thank you for keeping us up to speed on where we're at with this. I'm sure there's going to be a ton more to come here as we move into December, January, and the new year. So thank you. So
Yeah, you're very welcome.
we're going to go from STIP to STIF.
So, co-chair, before we move on, we have one other item in this section of the agenda. In your packet, we have a draft memo, comment letter on the STIP. Knowing that the comment period was ending here very soon, we drafted up a template for C4 to consider whether you want to submit it or not. But we thought, given the turnaround, we'd compose something and base it on your past feedback on the issues. So that's on page 25 of your packet, if that's something you want to consider.
Thank you, Chris, for backing me up on that. I appreciate it. Can you bring it up on the screen? I think, I mean, a number of us probably are working on multiple screens or devices and whatnot, but you can just bring it up for those of us that are not.
Yes, 1 second.
Put your IT skills to use here, Chris.
Yeah, and while he's doing that, when you all read the letter, you'll realize that there's not really a recommendation on any of the scenarios that was displayed in Travis's PowerPoint. So if you do want to take that a strategy, you might want to think about either taking the letter with those kind of edits, or even adding an edit that suggests a particular scenario.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm interested at least submitting a letter. I have a couple of comments on some of the verbiage within the letter, but I think we should start with, I think the group conversation, is this a worthwhile pursuit of C4 submitting a letter regarding the, at least a draft comment letter. Mayor Knapp.
I think it can be worthwhile to submit a letter, but in order to be effective, I think we have to make a specific suggestion. And absent that, I think it just becomes sort of white noise in the discussion. And I'm not sure, I mean, I could imagine here an hour or more debate about how to do this. It's a fairly complex question. So I'm not clear that we're prepared at this point to make that kind of a judgment collectively.
Yeah, Mayor Knapp, I agree. I think reading through the letter, we kind of took a shotgun approach and touched on a lot of things within that letter. And I was not an English major in college, and so some of the wordsmithing to probably make sense of narrowing it down to a couple of items would take a lot of work on this group to do. Yeah, it just seemed we're trying to, I mean, as an example, we've got these issues, but then we come down to the last paragraph and, oh, by the way, there's transit too, right, that we're concerned about, right? So that seemed to be an afterthought when we just come out of this conversation with Travis about the transit and multimodal is a very big theme with the STIP process by the sounds of it already in terms of how that's loaded. So yeah, I don't know if we, in the time that we have as a group, could wordsmith it? I mean, do we want to maybe narrow it down to maybe one or two high points that we really want to stress upon? Or just scrap it entirely?
Well, it might be, Mayor, it might be a good idea to have maybe Chris put up, for example, the funding scenarios on that one PowerPoint slide. That might give some specificity and some discussion to see what we're all thinking.
Okay, well, he's fishing for that. Mr. Keith, did you have a comment?
No, I don't have a comment.
Okay, Councilor Heisey?
Yeah, I think we can try and figure out how we might respond to this. I don't know that we'll get there either. I know that, you know, I've already talked with our staff and we will be submitting a letter from our council regarding this, and we would be happy to discuss with any of you that might be interested in going in on a letter with us. We're always happy to join forces. If we are going to go down the road of trying to submit a letter, one thing that occurs to me is that we keep talking about congestion pricing and the 205 project and how that affects our whole region and how that interacts with the work we're doing on at the county level to study how we can improve our transit access, the desperate need we have in Clackamas County to make sure that if we're doing congestion pricing on 205, that we are also simultaneously putting significant dollars into improving our transit system and into improving multimodal options so that we're not just pushing everyone in their individual little cars off onto streets all the way around 205 when we make this transition. So that could be an organizational theme for our for a letter that then subsequently points to one of these scenarios.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Axelrod?
I'm very much in favor of putting in some kind of letter. I'd like to see Highway 43, you know, in there. It affects a lot of our region in the C4 group, and you know, I'm going to be talking to my council and maybe other multi-jurisdictional cities around that might want to join in a letter, but maybe a letter from cities and C4 together. So I'd be interested in some specificity there.
Councilor Morrison?
Yeah, just real quick to follow up on Mayor Axelrod. He's been very, very polite and hasn't been greedy. So I will kindly point out that I would be in favor of specifically mentioning 43. And if somebody comes up, why that one? If those of you who've been around for a couple of years remember, Highway 43 was #1 on a project list last year, and the mayor agreed to remove it to help a project. I believe it was in Milwaukee. And because we were very confident of the T2020 plan, and because the Highway 43 project better fit the T2020 plan. So I would impose a request to the group to have some compassion and a little bit of sympathy for that project in particular. And I know I think Happy Valley can make a complaint that they had a project that was going to get funded, but 43 was kind of special. It was special because of what was going to get funded, and then the funding backed off for very legitimate and good reasons, and now has.
No, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Councilor Morrison, and yes, I think Milwaukee should put all of their support behind West Lynn. I think that's a great idea. No, I mean, in all seriousness, I think individually or collectively, like I think if the jurisdictions along 43 get together and make a case in a joint letter in that capacity, I think might be good. And as a conversation piece, if we look at what has been put up here on the screen, if we're looking at as a C4 group, I mean, do we want to get behind one of those categories and say that we feel addresses our county collectively, if that's even possible, and how diverse we are. I mean, non-highway, safety, non-highway, those are both very positive categories that have a lot of wins across our county. Fix it's an important one. I mean, we've heard it time and time again. I mean, we're not going to touch a bridge repair with $700 million. It might pave a lot of roads, but that's a Band-Aid.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I knowing that this is going to be several years out and knowing, you know, how these processes go, it's usually a good idea to try to select the type of packaging, if you will, of the type of projects and emphasis versus a particular project. Because this is a statewide adoption. This is not a local adoption. This is going to be statewide. So I think that if there are a lot of letters and they're not all consistent coming from, let's say, Clackamas County or the Region 1 Act, for example, and we're all saying something different, I think that'll probably give the OTC some freedom to think about the, you know, what they think they feel or they're hearing the most of. So it would be a shame to pass up an opportunity to send a message from the county and the cities, all of us together, and pass that opportunity versus sending out different letters with different messages.
So, well, then I'm going to ask you, I mean, I'm going to put on you, Paul, in some regards. You seem to be and have been for the longest time, as long as I've been involved with C4, the transportation guru, if you will, of the BCC.
Guru, let's be careful. Let's be careful here. Thank you, Ron.
How about passionate? He's been passionate about transportation. Does that work there, Mayor Plam?
There you go. There you
go. You know, and I see Mayor Knapp's hand popped up as well, but he's another one that's passionate about transportation as well. I mean, where do we thread this needle? Is it the, you know, safety non-highway? Does that, I mean,
well,
what's the best bang for our buck?
Well, I think that's one to select. I'm not going to really suggest one over another. I just want we all to think about who we are as Clackamas County, and when we think about who we are and making sure that the rural aspects and the Region 1 Act, same thing. You know, as the vice chair of Region 1 Act, I got to think bigger than Clackamas County. But I'm here tonight as a county commissioner and thinking about all of us, and a number of the things that are in these packages are good. Obviously, the baseline is probably the least threatening of all. You know, I would say that safety is a huge issue, but safety non-highway is kind of problematic, knowing that you know, a lot of the safety elements and bottlenecks are highway. So how do you get some of those in congestion relief out of that as well? Which is, again, how do you get that, strike that balance? And that's why the baseline or enhance column looks probably more balanced across the road. I just hate to see a severe change that subtracts dollars away from our normal routine, and which I think is seen to be spread out. We got to remember that the region within the urban growth boundary, we get MTIP dollars. We have other funding tools. The rural areas do not. This is it. STIP is it. That's the only way that the rural areas are going to see any funding whatsoever. So I would not want to subtract dollars from the rural.
I agree.
I'm sorry, I just have a quick follow-up question because I'm not quite following what your concerns are about moving away from the baseline with regard to how that will impact rural partners or the rural access to these dollars. This is just a newbie question for you here.
Well, I wish there was an easy answer, Counselor. Thank you for the question, though. So the bucket of dollars that we have enjoyed in the STIP cycles, that 3-year cycle for the rural areas, is always been competing with the urban areas, if you will. So what happens is, because of the political horsepower of the larger cities and the urban areas and metro and all of us together, we have seen to subtract away any funding opportunities for a lot of rural needs. And we have more people moving out in the rural areas than ever before, because that's where affordability is. That's where a number of things that people are drawn to are. And therefore, we are seeing a lot more fatalities and accidents and congestion in our rural roads than we've ever seen before. I mean, it's at record levels. Of course, I'm thinking pre-COVID. I expect some change post-COVID, but not much. But that's always been something that's been a crying shame. And the other counties in the state, by the way, we have a county in Regional 1 Act that is been pretty effective in Hood River, who's part of Regional 1 Act. I'd be concerned that they're going to send a letter that's going to be contrary to ours. If I say ours, maybe Clackamas County. But I think we have to consider that this is a statewide issue, and the rural needs out there are tremendous. And so anything that subtracts substantially away from that for their needs will be problematic.
I guess I'm not understanding how these different scenarios translate into a subtraction from rural needs. Because if, for example, under safety and non-highway, wouldn't that capture a number of the concerns that you have about needs not being met in rural areas?
Right. Well, Chris, could you put the other slide up with the vertical bars? I think it preceded this one.
It's on page 20.
I think it's earlier than that.
Oh, not that one.
The one that had the colored bars of the scenarios. Keep going. There we go. So that's where you kind of, Councilor Heisey, I think that's where you kind of can see some subtraction. So obviously they put a whole lot of money in, and fix is a big part of this as well. So that kind of gives you an idea of the scenarios. Another way of looking at it.
I still don't follow, but I'll stop monopolizing.
It's okay. Mayor Knapp?
At this point, my understanding is they're not talking about specific projects. And I think that whether we support Highway 43 or not, and many of us do, I think it's a legitimate discussion to have. I don't think trying to jump in and say, no, we need this project funded goes to the question that's being decided. And the question being decided is how to proportionately allocate funding amongst these different things. So even when you go like on this bar chart to the middle one, the non-highway, it's got that great big chunk in the middle, which is Fix-It, which I think is Fix-It highways, isn't it? And it's the 3 above the top dotted line that vary in proportion to each other as to how much proportion goes to the non-highway piece and how much to the safety piece and how much to the enhanced piece primarily. So understanding what is being decided at this point is important. And I don't think a letter that fails to address that specific question will have much weight. I think we need, if we're going to send a letter, we need to frame it within the choice that is in front of them at this point in time. And to me, that says we would have to come down in favor of one of these alternatives over the others. And we're having quite a long discussion already, and I'm not sure we've gotten to the crux of this question yet. So.
No, and Mayor Knapp, I think that is where we're at with the question of a letter is which piece above the dotted line do we feel is what OTC should put their most focus behind.
All right, so I will just say, I think it needs to be the non-highway or the non-highway and safety one myself, that has, you know, the biggest amount still going to the middle category there, but in trying to balance the needs that I hear expressed, both urban and rural, that we need to address a range of things, and we're really just, you know, putting Band-Aids on stuff at this funding level across the state, but you know, those wounds need Band-Aids, I guess. So I would be in favor of trying to cover several of them.
Yeah, Mayor Knapp, I'm with you in terms of looking at the non-highway safety portions. Again, it's just very similar to the other charts that we were looking at. Those were the ones that were rated highly in terms of what's being looked at by, sounds like, best bang for the buck in terms of conversation that OTC is going to have. Let's see, Commissioner Lewis.
Sure, thanks. I am excited to have this conversation because it's talking about the values that we want to bring to our roads and what we need to see. But I think in addition to, you know, the kind of improvements we want to make, it's also about looking at what we would be most competitive for. And with Fix-It, it's purely based on lane miles. So when you look at a project like 43, that lane mileage relative to, you know, a project in Wasco County isn't that much, but it's expensive lane miles. So that project is maybe going to be better competing in safety or enhance. So having those buckets be big enough would be really important in my mind. Really drawing the previous mayor's comments, non-highway and non-highway safety are both, I think, good and noble scenarios to put out there for what I see are part of the region needing.
Thank you. Mayor Axelrod, your hands up again, sir.
Yeah, well, so that I'm trying to understand how some of these fit in. It seems to me to pick one of these categories, we got to have a feeling for what projects we're thinking of in the future. And so, as Christine just clarified, you know, if we are thinking, if it's not in the Fix-It, I'm just thinking of Highway 43 specifically, just thinking about it. The non-highway category, it doesn't work, right? I mean, it's a highway, right? So it's got to be enhanced in safety, or if it's not in Fix-It, it's either.
Yeah, no. So Mayor Axelrod, the way I look at it, the reason it's called non-highway is because the way I look at it is the non-highway section there at the top is garnering a greater portion of that particular bar. So the non-safety, non-highway, is that, you know, the enhanced portion looks like it's a little bit smaller, but then the safety, non-highway, there's a little bit more of an equitable spend or allocation to those two buckets. Whereas then in the Fix-It category is called the Fix-It category because we've expanded above that dotted line what the Fix-It is. So I think what we look at is that these are what the OTC is going to look at is those are the buckets that we're going to put together. So where does 43 fit in that blue section of Fix-It, or does it fit better in the enhanced bucket? Like, that's where I think when we figure out which column we want to support OTC to go after, once they decide, then it's about going, okay, where does 43 fit best? Where does Milwaukee's project fit? Where does Estacada's, you know, is it a local program that they're after that they can go after, right? So much like when we did those huge spreadsheets and narrowed until we went, here's our project.
Well, you know, when I look at these scenarios, there's not really that much different. I mean, you know, the first three are all the same, up through, you know, up till you're spending $750 million. And then there's a little variation in Fix-It. And then the others are they're not that much different. Seems kind of weird to me. I don't know. I would expect a different spread, but whatever works best for our projects, I think we just consider that.
Okay. Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, I would just say that to answer the question, that if you wanted the best chance for a project like Highway 43, you want to pick the one with the biggest amount of enhance, and that would be the second column. So that bright blue above the dotted line, the upper dotted line, the bigger that bucket is, the more availability for funding for enhanced projects. If you want pavement on the roads, you want to fix it all the way to the right. Okay. So fix it is more pavement. So I curious as to the folks in the rural areas, do you guys want to see road improvements or pavement improvements? That's another way of describing what the difference is between fix it and enhance.
I think that's a great way to put that, Commissioner. Yes, Mayor Knapp.
I understand, but I don't totally agree, because say you've got a highway running out through Molalla, you've also got safety factors where you have crossings on that highway, where you have traffic controls, where you have adjacent facilities for bikes or pedestrians to be safe, where that passes through the core part of the city. So I can see lots of pieces of this that can go to those components, even in rural areas, other than just slamming a new highway pavement all the way through town and saying, that's it, So I think there's more to it. And I think the same kind of thing goes to 43. When we talked about the metro measure, we were talking about a lot of enhancements to 43 for other than just vehicle uses, safety improvements, bicycle ped improvements. Those fall into those money buckets that are above the dotted line on this scenario, as I best understand it. And so it's not like it's black and white either or, and the amount of variability amongst these is relatively small. That's the problem with the whole thing, is there's not enough money. But if we're going to take the amount of money that's available and we're going to help spread it around, whether it's urban or whether it's out somewhere in the county, to what extent do we want just road paving, and to what extent do we want to have some allocations provided for these other purposes, are the three clear categories above the dotted line?
No, and Mayor Knapp, I agree. I think we're trying to decide, do we want a 30,000 foot level letter to the OTC to say these are the one or two categories that we think are really going to meet the needs of our county, or that's the decision point here, right?
Right.
Once
I agree. Yeah.
Then when they decide on which category, then we can get down into the 10,000 foot level or ground level and talk about that piece. So to me, I think we're all talking about the same two categories. And I think maybe we just need to ask Chris and the rest of the county staff to maybe draft a letter that aims towards those two I guess choices. Take some of those, extrapolate some of those pieces from the letter that's there that fit into the non-highway and non-highway safety that we have done as a county, where we've leveraged funds throughout, that give us the best opportunity to win. Does that seem?
Yep.
Okay. Commissioner Savas, real quick, and then.
I just wrote in. I didn't realize I had my hand still up. I just want to point out, put it in a chat, that to Mayor Knapp's point, the enhanced column has the second largest safety bucket. And to Mayor Knapp's example of Molalla Avenue, or Molalla, I think in Molalla, did you mean Molalla Avenue or the city of Molalla? Mayor Knapp?
I think either way.
Yeah, either way. So when they do a highway project, let's just say it's an orphan highway like Highway 211, or it's state highway, they're going to do all the safety. They have to do all the safety stuff. So all those safety enhancements would have to be done if there was a major highway rebuild. So and we have actually approved in Malala previously in not Fix It, but in STIP dollars, a project that built some sidewalks in Malala, which was safety. And that's why I think our safest area is either baseline or enhance, just from historical experiences.
Okay. Councilor Sherman.
Thank you. I guess, just maybe one thought, and this is where I have a little bit of a concern in making hundreds of millions of dollars of asset shift recommendations based on really basic charts that provide no granularity whatsoever. My issue is in looking through this documentation, when we're looking at a reduction in Fix It, the adjusted baseline is to just barely maintain status. Any of the others, with the exception of the Fix It recommendation, are a near-term and long-term deterioration of the highways and the bridges. So it's not maintaining status quo and it's not improving. It's a reduction over time. So that's my only concern in moving away from the adjusted baseline. In my mind, the adjusted baseline starts off with what do we need to get the basics done? And obviously those first four categories are pretty much set, or the first three are set in stone. And the fourth one is really where, where we need to kind of focus on that. I mean, I'm all for kind of looking at allocating resources to other things, but what I just can't gauge is, so if we're going to make a bet on a deterioration in our facilities, do increasing these other buckets actually make a substantial difference for that deterioration, or are we just shifting small amounts of money that don't really have that type of desired impact? So that's I really don't want to answer, just more questions than answers. Thank you.
Well, thank you for adding more fog to the no, but it's I can't argue with it. That's good. Let's see. Watching hands jump around. All right, Councilor Heisey, and then we still have STIF to talk about as well.
Yeah, I just want to say real quick that we are also struggling with decades of just chronic underinvestment in our non-highway and in safety, honestly. So I don't know how you make up for that unless you start investing more dollars there. And we don't have much money. And we keep looking at all these problems all over the county. Every time we have a conversation about transit, it's about how we don't have the money and we don't have safe ways for people to get from point A to point B to take advantage of transit. So I don't know how we get people out of their cars meaningfully and reasonably. And this is also a huge equity issue if we don't start putting a little more money there. And, we're worrying about $600 million here, which is a lot of money and nothing all at the same time. So, I don't know. I don't feel like the little tiny bit that the difference between the adjusted baseline and the rest of these in terms of the funding, and I don't think that's going to make a substantial difference in the quality of our roads. This is funding for 3 years. We will have additional pots of money out there to do road care, and we will have other places and ways in which our roads are cared for, and we haven't seen ways to invest in non-highway and safety.
Chris, and I think this came up in earlier this evening, but if we wanted to submit a letter, when does that need to be in by?
I believe November 20th.
Okay. So we're basically on a crunch time here, right, for this?
Yeah, to be able to
submit anything
for the OTC meeting for its decision.
Okay.
I think technically we could submit one up until the 30th, if I read that slide correctly. They just prefer it by the 20th.
Yeah, the OTC meets on December 1st, so anything you send on the 30th will be read on the last day.
Okay. So let's do, again, it seems like we're either at an impasse where we write no letter because we're still divided, or we shoot for middle ground and at least be a part of the conversation.
Can I interrupt real quick to correct a date on the presentation PowerPoint slide? It is open until November 16th is what was on the open house.
Okay.
Yes, but public comment goes from the 20th, and then they will accept as late as November 30th. Public comment and open house are two different things.
Okay. So I'm more inclined to say, let's have staff draft another letter, and I guess we have to get it out sooner than later and via, I don't like us having to continue to vote via email on these things. These are important pieces for sure. Is there a different thought?
One other option is to empower the executive committee to make a decision.
So email your executive board members and let them know how you feel and how you want them to vote. Right? Is that what we're looking at?
Well, I was saying you decide today what the direction of the letter is, and then the executive committee makes its, gives it the approval.
Okay. Councilor Sherman, did you have another comment to make?
Yeah. I just want to make sure that I'm clear. What I'm not saying is, I don't want to be the impasse. What I'm not saying is I'm not supportive of those. I'm just saying it's hard to make a good quality decision based on the information at hand. And
Sure.
Full disclosure, I have, my council hasn't looked this letter over or reviewed it in any way, shape, or form. So I'm speaking on behalf of me personally and not on behalf of my city council when I raise these questions. Being a numbers geek, I like to really kind of know, hey, if I'm going to shift a line here, what's that really mean when I shift that line? So, but I appreciate that. And of course, fully supportive of my cohorts here as we debate this. So
Thank you for the clarification. Mayor Knapp, your hand's up again. Did you have something else?
Not very much. If you look at enhance at the bar on enhance and you look at the non-highway safety, there's very little differentiation. The non-highway piece is about the same size. The amount between safety and enhance varies just slightly between those two alternatives. My preference would still run to non-highway safety. I don't know how close we are to be able to make a decision. We could have made a motion and see who votes for it if you wanted.
Please.
I would make a motion that we write a letter in support of the non-highway safety alternative from C4.
Okay. So a motion's been made by Mayor Knapp, and was that second by you, Mayor Axelrod?
Councilor Morrison.
Thank you, Councilor Morrison. If you guys want to, those in favor want to put your hand up in the participant box or put it up in screen here.
Can I ask a question?
We can't see.
Yeah.
Can you back us out to the full screen? There we go.
Yeah.
All right. Somebody said they had a clarification.
I was just curious. So it sounds like that overall approach addressing that element of the program as a broad category seems fine, but what's around it? Or do we talk about the areas of needs that we have within the county? Is that what we're going to kind of do? Do we touch base on, without maybe being specific projects per se, but just the kinds of enhancements and deficiencies we see that we think fall within the program? Is that what the letter is going to address?
I think that's where, Chris and Trent maybe need a wordsmith, again, looking at, if you look at the letter that's in there right now, it specifically calls out some great projects that we have done with STIP funding, either as it's straight dollar amounts for projects or leveraging for other things that we've done in our cities. So I think if they're able to take that and spin it to this particular category, and even in pulling out the county TSP and look at, maybe they pull out a couple of examples of projects that are on the docket that give the OTC an example of where those might fall. I think we leave that to staff to wordsmith that and use those examples. Okay, so we have a motion on the table. So all those in favor of the motion that's on the table right now, if you'll put your hands up on the screen. Okay, anyone opposed? Commissioner Savas, okay. Well, so I guess we're gonna move forward, draft a letter with as the motion was put out there on the table there, Chris, and we'll bring that back as soon as we can to the e-board and then back to you as well. Okay, thank you guys.
Mr. Chair, for what it's worth, I abstained.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Chair, I'm curious, I don't necessarily want to put Commissioner Savas on the spectrum on the radar here, but I'm just curious why you're opposed to it.
Well, Mayor, you and a number of your supporters in the room made a pretty good argument for Highway 43. So the way I read this, I could be wrong, but the way I read this is that one of the larger buckets for the highway, not the highway, but the larger buckets for enhanced is where I think your project would fit, is in there and is less so in the non-highway selection. So if you really wanted that, I would presume if the group wanted that, I would presume you would select enhance, for example, because I think the more money in that bucket, the more odds are that those kinds of projects will be spread around the state. Those dollars will be spread around the state. If you cut that bucket in half, which is really, you look at the size of that bucket, then that decreases the odds that there'll be any substantial funding, as I read, and I could be wrong.
Well, that's what I'm trying to understand this whole thing, and I'm why I'm confused about this. And if that's the case, I would like to withdraw mine because I would support that, and I'd like the enhance. And why don't we say enhance? Why don't we do both of them?
Well, and that's again, to go back to the one slide, those were the two categories that had the most in terms of traction and where the OTC was. If you look at the data that they put together, those were the two categories that they're trying to decide between. And if we want to support their decision to go to those two categories to decide between, or if we want to lean more to one or the other, that was the crux of this conversation.
Okay, well, I misunderstood the characterization Nat made about them being the same and just in terms of the distribution of dollars. So I guess I'd withdraw my vote. Or I guess maybe haven't you taken the vote yet, have you? Or have you? I guess you did, yeah.
Yeah, we did, and it passed. And you asked that question of Commissioner Savas after we had voted and passed on it.
Yeah.
So
for what it's worth, I want to point out that in our conversation with Travis, he pointed out that he was working for an organization that's really trying to figure out how to make it easier for projects that have multifaceted issues to take advantage of these dollars. I absolutely think 43 is like Monroe in Milwaukee. I think it has a whole bunch of different things going on, and I don't think that you are only limited to the enhanced bucket. I think that this is a project that has a lot of safety, it has a lot of multimodal, it has all kinds of issues. And the question is not about which of these buckets does it fit in best? It's how many of these buckets will we be able to leverage to make 43 move as far along as we can with the limited dollars that are available. So I just want to encourage you to think about this from a different perspective than just one bucket, because I think that's not the direction that we were told they're going.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it, because if you actually look at the enhanced bucket, it's got a considerable safety element, it's got a considerable enhanced element, and it's got a considerable non-highway element. So it does really all three of those very, very well. It just, the thinning of the soup in the other scenarios could, and there might be an application, frankly, that says, you know, they're looking for, maybe the grant's weighted where they're looking for a project just like that. So therefore, the bigger that bucket, those buckets are, that 43 or Monroe would fit, would be those top three. That's what I think that's what we need to look at, is those top three and how they're balanced.
So maybe that's the question.
And that's,
why does it matter that we limit ourselves now? Why not cover both those categories anyway? As of right now, we see a variety of projects that could fall into both these categories, and we would support those two broad areas. Why not just say that and just say one of them? I mean, at this point, since we're not talking about real specifics, let's keep it open. That's what I would think. Sorry if I, you know.
Hey, I'm just the chair of this thing. So, you know, right now we've got a letter with a direction on the table that we've approved.
Right.
There's
So I haven't been mayor long enough. There's people on this that's been longer than me. How do we back out of a vote and do another vote? Somebody give me the answer.
Who's our parliamentarian here on this, you know?
It's never happened in the entire history of the world. Well, you just.
So, okay, so here, I need a motion to, I guess, withdraw that.
I would move that we reconsider the prior motion and its approval and consider a new motion incorporating the enhanced category. And I don't have it in front of me with the screen right now, but the category we approved, or adding the enhanced category to our letter.
So, Mayor Axelrod, let's break it into two different pieces. So first, make the motion to reopen that dialogue and a vote. Let's do that first. So make that motion.
To open the dialogue for the vote?
Yeah, a motion to reopen that conversation.
Reconsider.
Yeah, okay, I would move that we reopen the discussion on the category of funding for consideration.
Okay,
Second.
great. So we're reopening that conversation. All those in favor of reopening that conversation and that vote? Okay. Okay. Those that don't want to reopen the conversation and we're good where we're at and move forward. 1, 2. Okay. So the motion to reopen the conversation passes. We're now back open. All right, Mayor Axelrod, make your motion now that you want to make.
Yes, and Paul, I don't have the category in front of me. Let me call it up, I guess. So
it was the enhanced category.
I know, but the other one was it safety and non-highway?
Non-highway / safety.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I would move that the letter we have staff put together address the enhanced category and the non-highway safety categories.
Thank you, sir.
Broad categories.
All right, there's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
Mayor, would you friendly amendment and change that to category to scenario? I think that's what you mean, or
Yes.
maybe not. I want to make sure I understand what you mean, because scenario were the bars with that mixture, and then the categories were each of those categories, which was.
I'm sorry, we're talking about scenarios.
Correct. Scenarios.
I'm sorry. So, all right, I will restate the motion that we consider that the letter address both the enhancement scenario and the non-highway safety scenario.
I'll second that.
All right, we've got a motion and a second. Any discussion on this particular issue?
No.
No. Stan is like, get me out of here. This is Zoom number 7 of the day. All right. Okay. So all those in favor of the new motion to include the scenarios of enhance and highway safety, non-highway safety, hands up in your screens, please. All right. Those that are a no, do not want to move forward. Okay, any abstentions? Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ed. All right, so it passes that we will address in a letter to OTC, the enhanced scenarios and the non-highway safety category scenarios, pardon me. Okay, we're good. All right.
Thank you,
This is
Chair.
how-
My apologies for that, not quite understanding that fully, but I appreciate the relook.
Hey, you're just going out in a glorious way, aren't you, Mayor Axelrod?
So staff
I love
will work on that letter. So just so I'm clear, do we have the green light to bring this back to the C4 Executive Committee for review and final approval then?
Yes. Well, yeah, and then I think we need to get it out to the greater body, do we not?
I would,
Or is
we could.
time is of the essence?
I think a courtesy review, if you could just get it out so we could just, look at it and could send it back to you, Chris, and you could look, or Brian, or could look at it for feedback or something, but
Okay,
I mean, we're leaving it up to you guys for the final editing and getting it in, I think.
that's a dangerous proposition. Just kidding. Okay. All right, so just as a time check, y'all, it's 8:24. We still have STIF to talk about and congestion management plan.
No.
I hear a no.
I second that.
I'm seeing a lot of stern faces. So Chris, in terms of the time sensitivity on the STIF piece and the CCMP.
We have panelists here to talk about the STIF work. I would suggest we move forward with that. CCMP, I'm giving that update. I can make it very short, as well as the update after that. Or move it to the next meeting, whichever the group wants.
All right, group, I'm looking to you on this one.
Is the panelist staff or outside people?
The presenter is staff, but then we have some external folks who are involved in this as well.
Okay, well, I'm going to press forward. How about that? Those of you that want to hang out, let's have it. Those of you that have had 7 Zoom meetings tonight and need to get caught up on your Netflix or a really good book, feel free to sign off and we'll see you next month. All right, let's move forward. Let's talk about the STIF funding. Who do we have, Chris?
So we have Christina Babcock here from Mount Hood Express, and she is in the room. And
Great.
Christina, you can bring up your PowerPoint.
Okay, I will do that. So good evening, everyone. I'm Christina Babcock. I am the transit coordinator here at Clackamas County. On the phone are actually all the other small transit providers. We have Andy Howell, Dwight Brashear, Todd Wood, and Tom Strader, as well as Teresa Christofferson. So I will make this brief, and we're not going to go into too much detail. Much of the detail was provided in a memo that was in the packet ahead of the meeting. So if there are specific questions, once I wrap up my presentation, like I said, all of the transit providers are here. And so we can go through those specific questions if we choose to do so. Let me bring up my screen here. Okay. Here's some weirdness going on here. Just a second. Try this. Okay. So HB 2017, the State Transportation Improvement Fund Formula Program, shorter STIF, really focuses on 2 key funding activities. It looks at service enhancements or improvements, and then planning efforts to improve overall public transit. So within those funding activities, project priorities include improving public transit for low-income households, student transportation, low or no emissions buses, improving connections between communities, and then particularly important here in Clackamas County, reducing fragmentation between transit providers. Of keynote with STIF is that all of the projects that are listed to be funded must be identified in a local planning process. And so those local planning processes look like the Unified Service Enhancement Plan, the Coordinated Human Services Plan, maybe the Mount Hood Multimodal Plan, Transit Master Plans, and Transit Development Plans. So there were some changes to HB 2017 for FY22 and 23. And those fall into two categories. First category was the change to allow preservation of existing service with STIF dollars. So funds that are coming in through the STIF formula program can be used to maintain service that already exists. And that's particularly important to most of the transit providers with the ongoing pandemic and economic downturn issues. It's important that the transit providers in Clackamas County are able to maintain the service levels that are currently existing. And then additionally, there's this STF stabilization, and it's where the STIF and STF programs combine. And the STIF is no longer supported by general fund dollars, which is about approximately 10 million, and that number is give and take a little bit. So the STIF funding now will be used to backfill that shortfall in STIF, and so that money actually comes off of the top of the STIF formula dollars. So in terms of how the funding works, ODOT will release all of the funds to the qualified entity in each county in Oregon. And in this particular 3-county region, TriMet is the qualified entity. And so to access the funding, the qualified entity has to submit a plan with a list of the projects. And again, all of this list of projects have to have been previously identified on another plan. And they request those to be funded, and they're submitted to ODOT, and then they go through a whole approval process. So TriMet, as a qualified entity, asks all of the transit providers here in Clackamas County to work together to recommend the projects that will be included in an overall plan and give them a big list for them to include and then send on to ODOT for approval. So with that, all of the transit providers here in Clackamas County form the Clackamas County Advisory Committee. And that is a committee that has representatives from the community on it, as well as Canby Area Transit, Clackamas County, Sandy Area Metro, South Clackamas Transit District, and Wilsonville. So an IGA was developed at the beginning of the HB 2017 funding cycle, so back in FY 18-19. And this committee reviews and recommends projects to present to the technical advisory for TriMet. And again, this committee doesn't just include the small transit provider, but also includes representations from seniors, persons with disabilities, low-income households, and educational institutions within Clackamas County. So real quick, this is a busy slide, and most of these numbers are projections. They're not actual funding dollars at this point, but this is a breakdown of overall anticipated funding for the STIF formula dollars in FY22. So as you can see, TriMet takes up a large portion of them, and then they are broken down accordingly between all of the transit providers and then the 3 different counties. Wilsonville is the second largest recipient of STIF formula dollars, and they cross both both Washington County and Clackamas County, so their funding distribution is a bit complicated, but they're also the largest small transit provider in the area. And then FY23 anticipated funding looks very similar to FY22 with a projected increase. At this point, it's expected that hopefully the economy starts to recover and payroll taxes increase. And so overall funding is slightly higher, or is anticipated to be slightly higher in FY23. So like I said, I was going to keep it brief, super high level overview. And again, all of the projects that the different transit providers have recommended, or the technical advisory committee approved for the small transit providers to pass forward to TriMet to include on the plan, are highlighted in a memo that was attached to your packet. So I'll cut it off there. I know we're over time already, so you know, whatever everyone has for questions, I'll be more than happy to answer, as well as any of the transit providers that are on the call.
Well, Christina, thank you so much, and I apologize that we ran long on the first piece, and the amount of work that the transit groups have been doing these last couple of years, and the things that projects I know in Canby, our transit director has been, our previous one and our new one have been very busy plotting and planning, and it seems like a lot of projects are getting done and moving forward. So thank you for all that you guys are doing to keep that going. Commissioner Morrison, you had a comment?
Yeah, real quick. And I bring this up all the time, and I keep getting different answers because it's always different entities. And so I'm sorry to do this again, but I'm curious for the Clackamas County Advisory Committee, why isn't the Tualatin Shuttle a part of the small transit providers? Because I know they're a part of another committee that's working on transit within Clackamas County.
So the Tualatin Shuttle specifically is funded under regional coordination dollars, which is a different portion of the program. This particular presentation and this particular list, as well as the technical advisory committee that was established, is focused on the STIP formula fund dollars, and in STIP formula fund dollars in Clackamas County specifically. So the Tualatin Shuttle is a Washington County project at this point and is funded under the regional coordination dollars under the STIF program.
I was under the impression that there was some funds coming from STIF because we do service and have service within Clackamas County, but I don't want to, we were way too late on this, and I'll just leave it to our staff to work with you and make sure that we're in the.
Great. Any other comments or questions? See, Christina, there's a benefit to going after a long conversation because everyone's just, they're done. They've got nothing else to say.
Either that or I was just super eloquent, right? I'll take the latter of those two.
All right. Very good. All right. Well, thank you very much. Chris, CMMP, we need to talk about or not?
Happy to do it now, or we can do it next month. I can be pretty brief tonight if you'd like.
All right, pressing on.
Okay. So just to jog your memory a little bit, back during the last legislative session, you'll recall that we were continuing to push the 205 project for funding. And at that time, Rep. Prusak and others proposed an amendment that made a lot of waves, but it also met a lot of strong opposition by a number of key constituencies. And so since session, we kind of took a step back and did a bit of a course correction on our strategy. And instead of pushing funding solutions for 205, instead we decided to start working on requesting some kind of official table of stakeholders to be convened to identify funding solutions for both I-205 and the Rose Quarter bottlenecks. Because what we were seeing was a lot of finger pointing between the legislature and ODOT on who was responsible for this work. And so since that time, the county have been meeting with legislators, OTC commissioners, ODOT officials, regional partners, local stakeholders, you name it, to really talk about this and advocate for this stakeholder table. And many of you were probably involved in that effort. So you're pretty familiar with this. And at the end of the day, it all paid off. At the August 3rd R1 Act meeting, a motion was passed almost unanimously requesting that the OTC convene the stakeholder table. And then a month later at the OTC meeting, the OTC directed ODOT's Urban Mobility Office to develop what they called a Comprehensive Congestion Management Plan, or CCMP, for the region, essentially an implementation and funding strategy for the major projects in the Portland metro area, including the I-205 project. So that was their answer to this call for a stakeholder table. So it wasn't exactly what we were going for, but nonetheless, it was a big step forward to acknowledge that action was needed. And so since that time, really, it's been this question about what does the process look like? And that's been a bit unclear, but what we do know is that the Urban Mobility Office is to provide a recommendation, a recommended CCMP to the OTC at their December 1st meeting. There are going to be no decisions at that meeting. It's just informational at this point. The other thing that they're working on as part of it that you may have already seen, and it's in our packet tonight, is a CCMP map of key projects within the region. The initial draft map was put out in September, and it included the bottleneck projects and a host of other projects like McLaughlin Boulevard, and Boone Bridge was in there, TV Highway, a number of projects that were contained within the transportation measure. Sunrise was missing, and so we spent quite a bit of time advocating that that be included. And a month later, sure enough, updated map came out, the one that's in your packet, and Sunrise is now on that map. It's unclear right now, you know, what the failure of the transportation measure, what does that mean for this effort? But regardless, key legislators have been very clear that as part of the CCMP process, the bottlenecks will be key priorities in figuring out how they are funded and constructed. So right now we are continuing to speak with the Urban Mobility Office staff, and we'll be doing so again this month, and working with them in the lead up to the proposal they're going to put to the OTC at their meeting in December. And we're hopeful that it's going to be proposing, you know, exactly what we need for 205 in particular, you know, whatever is needed to get it over the finish line in terms of funding. So there's a possibility too that this spills over into the legislative session. We don't know what that will look like, and I think it'll depend on what's needed. You know, tolling revenue will obviously be a part of all of this, but to what degree and what gaps still remain, and it'll then be really contingent on ODOT to figure out what other places will be, what other sources of revenue will be looked at to help fill those gaps that tolling can't provide. So that's really all part of this effort, and happy to answer any questions.
Councilor Morrison, your hand's up. Did you have a comment on this? No? Okay. No comments or questions. Okay. Great. Chris, that was a great presentation. If you've got nobody asking questions, fantastic. What's that?
I covered it all.
You covered it all. Okay. Did we want to address election pieces? Was there something significant in that piece, Chris?
Nothing. I was just going to give a quick summary of all the local races, local regional races. Nothing critical. I'm sure this group is aware that the transportation measure failed. So I know President Peterson has already said that, you know, there's still a commitment from Metro to find a way to look at finding ways to move forward on this, and more to come.
Okay.
Can I spend 1 minute saying something?
Yes, Councilor Lewis, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to thank each and every one of you, in particular, folks who put in so many hours that it's actually days of your lives. I want to thank all of your staff, and for folks who are out there as part of the coalition that made a really beautiful and elegant package of projects and programs and envisioning our future. I recognize that it's my responsibility to say where we had shortcomings. One, it wasn't the right time. And two, looking back, and hindsight is always 20/20, more so this year than ever before, but we could have done a better job of setting a table to help us generate the revenue recommendations. So lots to learn. I'm not letting go of what this district, D2, has prioritized, and I will fight fiercely for those projects as well as 205 and other things coming forward on transportation. But this is just me saying thank you and more to come.
Okay, thank you very much. Real quick around the horn, any updates for JPAC Impact? Let's start with JPAC. Anything?
Mayor Knapp?
JPAC is scheduled to meet on the 19th. There, so far as I've heard, there's two major things. One is the topic of jurisdictional transfer assessment and draft recommendations for that program, which is of interest to some of us. And secondarily, there's a fairly extended presentation on the interstate bridge replacement program process that is becoming more solidified, that they're going to try to nail down how that whole project might move forward. So there may be other additions also, but that's what I know.
All right, thank you. Impact?
Looks like it's me. We discussed MPAC's role and what is and isn't working about MPAC today. We also heard a report on employment lands site readiness toolkit that's being put together. And I believe it was this last meeting that we also heard from the EPA and Metro about a pilot project to work on disaster preparedness around smoke. And Councilor Lewis, if you could remind me of the other one, if you happen to remember it, or Ed, you might remember. Anyway, two different things. Look for a workshop that's coming up for your staff. It should be happening sometime in November. I had a really interesting follow-up conversation with EPA and gave a lot of feedback about the uniqueness of the needs around disaster management and response in Clackamas County, informed by the experiences we've just had with responding to fire, and really stressed the need to think about the rural communities as well as the urban communities, and that those needs are very different.
Yeah, their presentation was Jeff Riker on our economic recovery framework that we're starting to roll out. So we're no longer doing a 2040 reset in the next few years, and instead focusing on a 5-year plan to make sure that we're doing economic recovery from this recession.
Okay. Commissioner Savas, R1 Act update?
Yes, we're having a special meeting on November 23rd. It's a Monday evening. And we're probably going to have the very same discussion with about 31 people around the recommendations. And I think we'll probably get into more granular stuff, I'm assuming, and get some more definition wrapped around this. I know it's difficult. I appreciate you all tonight on helping guide that. I think that those two married together, so to speak, might come up with a good mixture of opportunities for all the things that we spoke to tonight. So that's all I have.
Okay. And I'm going to skip other business. I don't think there is any other business. We've covered quite a bit tonight. So Chris, anything for the group?
Nothing else.
All right. All of you, thank you very much for hanging in there. And only an extra 16 minutes. That's all it took. So have a great evening, and I'll see everybody next month. Good night.